It was supposed to be a simple charter flight, nothing glamorous, nothing dramatic, just a routine hop from Miami to San Juan, weather clear, sky stable, and 42 passengers tucked into their seats, some chatting softly, some already dozing off. Flight 707, a vintage Convair 880 operated by a small private carrier, didn't even appear on major radar networks. It was the kind of flight you forget you ever boarded until you never get to land. Among the passengers was Johan Lindström, a 33-year-old systems engineer from Gothenburg, Sweden. He was in the United States on a 2-week work exchange and had impulsively booked the Caribbean leg as a short vacation before flying home. He wasn't supposed to be on that plane. His original flight had been cancelled, and 707 was the only alternative. The irony of that choice would haunt him for years. Johan remembered the takeoff clearly, the humming engines, the slight tilt of ascent, the clink of seatbelts loosening. It was warm in the cabin, the kind of warmth that makes you drowsy. He recalled looking out the window and seeing only water, endless and glimmering. No islands, no clouds, just the shimmer of the Atlantic stretching in every direction. Then everything changed. There was no bang, no explosion, no fire or screaming. It was silence first, the kind that punches a hole in your chest. The hum of the engines simply faded. The lights flickered and went black. And for one impossible moment, the plane just hovered in that silence, suspended between air and sea. Then came the fall. Johan couldn't remember how long they dropped. Time stretched, folded, collapsed. People screamed, cried, whispered prayers in dozens of languages. A child sobbed somewhere behind him. Johan gripped the armrests until his knuckles bled. Then there was impact, a deafening crunch of metal, a sudden rush of salt water, and a darkness so absolute it swallowed the sky. He awoke on something soft. A raft, a wing, no, the remnants of a seat row, half floating. The sun was blinding, and his mouth tasted like blood and salt. All around him the ocean hissed and spat as if mocking the idea of survival. There were no other voices, no other survivors in sight. Just Johan, drifting in the cradle of something ancient and cruel. He didn't remember crying, not then. What he remembered was silence again, the same silence that had warned him something was wrong. It became his companion in the days that followed. He drifted for what felt like weeks, though it was only 3 days. 3 days of salt-blistered skin, hallucinations, and bargaining with a sky that refused to answer. A fishing vessel from the Bahamas found him, barely alive, sunburned to the point of peeling, and muttering in a mix of English and Swedish. They thought he was a drunk castaway. They didn't believe him at first. No one did. Not the Coast Guard, not the Aviation Board, not even his own embassy. Flight 707, they said, did not exist in the public flight registry. The aircraft wasn't scheduled. The operator wasn't verified. There were no distress calls, no debris fields, no other survivors. Johan was alone, not just in the ocean, but in the truth. For months, he was interviewed, tested, interrogated. He showed them the bruises, the burns, the fragments of seat fabric still clenched in his fists. They shook their heads. "We found no crash, no signal. You must have dreamed it." But Johan remembered it. Every face, every cry, every second of free fall. He remembered the darkness, not just the blackout of instruments, but something deeper, a feeling that they had passed through something, that time had bent, that reality had skipped like a stone across a hidden ripple in the ocean. He kept a notebook after his release from the hospital. He wrote every detail he could recall, obsessively, not because he thought anyone would believe him, but because he couldn't afford to forget. If he forgot, then they would all be truly gone, and he couldn't bear that. Back in Sweden, the nightmares began. Sometimes he was floating again, sometimes he was still falling, but the worst dream was always the same. He was back on the plane, and everyone else had vanished. No pilot, no passengers. Just the hum of engines and a blinking red light overhead, a warning, a countdown, and a voice never identified whispering, they weren't supposed to find out. He began to believe the crash wasn't an accident, that Flight 707 had been erased, not just physically, but intentionally, that someone, somewhere, didn't want the world to know what happened in that piece of sky, that the Bermuda Triangle wasn't just myth, but mechanism, and he had slipped through it. Johan had survived, but he would never be allowed to forget. When Johan returned to Gothenburg, the city felt unfamiliar, not because it had changed, but because he had. The streets he once walked daily now felt too narrow, the sky too shallow. It was as if he had lived in a place bigger than Earth, a realm where dimensions folded in on themselves and time didn't follow rules. Coming back to routines, coffee in the morning, trams rattling past his flat, the quiet hum of an office keyboard, felt like playing a role he no longer remembered how to act. The media in Sweden initially embraced his story. "Swede survives mysterious crash in Bermuda Triangle," ran the headlines. Interviews followed, television appearances, but the tone shifted quickly. The aviation authorities in the US released a quiet statement. No official record of Flight 707 existed. No passenger manifest, no distress call, no radar data. Mr. Lindström appears to have experienced a non-flight related maritime trauma. That phrase, non-flight related, was repeated by news outlets and officials, and suddenly Johan went from survivor to question mark. Worse still, whispers began. Some speculated he had staged it. Others said he had suffered a psychotic break in the US and imagined the entire crash. His passport records were intact. His employer confirmed his travel dates. But the flight itself, the one he remembered in vivid detail, wasn't logged anywhere. Flight 707 had become a ghost, and Johan its unwilling witness. Back home, he tried to reclaim pieces of his life, but the nightmares didn't stop. In them, he sat alone in his seat, drifting through endless fog. The plane wasn't crashing anymore, it was floating, suspended above nothing, engines silent. There were no stars outside, no sea, just blankness, the kind of blankness that doesn't end. The kind that makes you question whether you ever existed at all. He stopped sleeping, stopped talking. Even his therapist couldn't reach him. She tried grounding techniques, regression therapy, even prescribed medication, but Johan refused. "I don't want to forget," he said. "If I forget, they win." One night, nearly 6 months after the crash, he received a letter. There was no return address. The handwriting was shaky, almost childlike. Inside was a single sentence. "You're not the only one." That sentence jolted something in him, something primal, electric. For the first time since he washed up half dead on a fishing boat, he felt the faint thrum of hope. Someone else knew. Someone else had seen it. He read the line over and over again until the paper blurred. Days later, a second letter arrived. This time it included a photograph, a grainy image of a man standing in front of what looked like the tail of a plane, half buried in dense vegetation. The number 707 was barely visible on the metal, rusted, scarred, but unmistakable. On the back of the photo, another message. It wasn't supposed to fly, but it did. He scoured the internet, contacted every aviation enthusiast forum he could find, including dark corners of conspiracy threads and Reddit pages dedicated to the Bermuda Triangle. A few trolls mocked him, but one user responded differently. The username was Black Echo 707. The message was short. Coordinates, Panama. Inland, not coast. Jungle, we found something. Johan didn't hesitate. He packed a single bag, cashed in the last of his vacation days, and left for Central America under the guise of a photography project. He told no one, not his family, not his employer. He didn't know what he expected to find, or even if the messages were real. But if there was even a chance that someone else had survived, or that the wreckage existed, he had to know. He arrived in Panama City and took a bus east, deeper into the country's rural fringe. The directions sent to him were vague, references to rivers, unpaved roads, abandoned military trails. He followed them for days, at times questioning his sanity. Locals warned him not to go too deep. "Bad land," one old man said. "Strange disappearances. You're not the first to come asking." On the fourth day he found it, or rather, what was left of it. The jungle had devoured most of the wreckage. Vines coiled around torn fuselage. Metal bones jutted from the ground like broken wings, but it was there, the tail section of Flight 707, his plane, the same red and white stripes, the same broken window near the lavatory he remembered peering through just before the blackout. But there was something else, a shelter, crudely built, branches, canvas, inside a journal. The first page read, "If someone finds this, tell the world." I wasn't alone on that plane. Something else was with us. Johan stared at the words, heart thundering. He flipped through the pages, descriptions of whispers in the fog, lights beneath the water, passengers acting strangely in the final minutes before the engines died. The last entry chilled him to the bone. "They're listening. They know when we talk about it. That's why no one remembers. But I won't forget. I won't." The entry was signed, A.H. Johan sat there for hours, listening to the jungle breathe. He wasn't crazy. He wasn't alone. The world may have erased Flight 707, but it hadn't erased him. And now he had proof, physical, undeniable. The wreckage, the journal, the photograph. But as he turned to leave, something caught his eye. Etched into the side of the broken fuselage, in red paint or blood, was a message. "You came back, but you're not supposed to." Johan stood frozen before the message etched into the wreckage. The paint, or whatever it was crusted, flaking at the edges, but unmistakably fresh compared to the corroded metal around it. The words felt alive, as though they had been waiting for him. The jungle grew louder in the silence, birds crying, leaves rustling, a distant hiss of something unseen moving just beyond his line of vision. He wasn't alone. He turned slowly, expecting, what? A survivor, a rescuer, but there was only foliage, thick and unbroken. He stared into the green until his eyes burned. The trees gave no answers, only shadows. Johan took a step back from the fuselage, breath shallow. The air smelled like rust and soil and something else he couldn't name, like old electricity, like ozone. The journal weighed heavy in his pack as he retreated from the site. He didn't run. He didn't want to trigger whatever instinct had carved that warning, but his legs ached with urgency. He followed the trail he had marked earlier with bits of orange thread, winding back toward the narrow river that had brought him here. The canoe he'd hidden was still tied under the fallen tree, untouched. As he paddled away, the jungle watched, indifferent and eternal. Back in Panama City, Johan didn't sleep. He checked into a cheap motel and spread the journal across the bed, photographing each page with trembling hands. The handwriting changed throughout the entries, sometimes smooth and calm, sometimes manic and uneven. It was as if the writer had shifted personalities over time or been pushed to the brink of madness. One entry stood out. The date was smudged but legible. April 4th, 1963, nearly a year after the disappearance of Flight 707. The entry described voices on the radio, though the plane's instruments were long dead. According to the journal, the writer claimed to hear coded messages at night, bursts of numbers, strange phrases repeated in monotone, coordinates unstable, phase shift incomplete, containment breached. He had no idea who was speaking or how, but believed the plane had flown through something, a pocket in space, a corridor between layers. The writer referred to it repeatedly as the fold. Johan didn't know what to make of it. He wasn't a physicist. He didn't care for sci-fi theories, but the word stuck with him. The fold, a tear, a wrinkle, a hidden dimension that swallowed the plane whole and spit it out again, mangled and scattered. Was that where the others had gone? Were they still there? He didn't dare show the journal to authorities. Not yet. He knew what would happen. They'd label him delusional, or worse, dangerous. He needed someone who would listen, someone who believed. Through one of the aviation forums, he connected with an American pilot named Rachel Delgado. She'd flown rescue routes over the Caribbean for nearly 15 years, and her name had come up in conspiracy circles for reporting distorted radar signatures near the Bermuda Triangle. Johan messaged her anonymously, attaching only a blurred photo of the journal's first page. She replied within an hour, "Where did you get this?" He told her, "Panama, near what's left of 707. She responded, "Meet me in Nassau. I'll get you in. But be ready. You won't be the first person who's tried to tell this story." Some of them never made it back. It took Johan 2 days to get to Nassau. He traveled under a different name, stayed off-grid, used cash only. His paranoia wasn't irrational. It had been growing since the crash, since the letters, since the jungle. He felt watched. In every airport, he imagined the glint of lenses. In every crowd, a pair of eyes locked too long. He stopped using his phone, burned the SIM card. He was done taking chances. Rachel met him at a dock outside the city at sunset. She was in her late 30s, lean, sun-worn, and no-nonsense. She didn't offer her hand. "You're late," she said, then nodded toward a rusted Cessna waiting on the water. "Let's go before they notice you're here." Once airborne, she explained her theory. "They've been covering up triangle incidents since the 40s, she said over the headset. "Flight 19 wasn't the first. Yours isn't the last. Every time a plane goes missing out here, they erase the logs, scrub the radar. The survivors, if there are any, they disappear, silenced, shipped to rehab centers, or declared dead." "Why?" Johan asked, his voice barely audible over the engine. "Because what's out there isn't supposed to exist," Rachel replied. "If people knew there were gaps in the sky, places where physics breaks down, they'd lose their minds. Or worse, they'd try to go through them." She banked the plane sharply, circling a cluster of islands. "But you saw it, didn't you?" she said. The shift, the silence, the sense that time didn't move right. Johan nodded. It felt like falling through nothing. Rachel handed him a tablet. On the screen was a map, a pattern of disappearances, coded by color and year. It formed a spiral centered on one point. She tapped it. "That's where your plane went down, but it's also where something's waking up." Johan stared at the coordinates. "What do you mean, waking up?" Rachel didn't answer. Instead, she descended toward a clearing on one of the outer islands, uninhabited, forgotten. There, in a hidden hangar half buried in brush, were pieces of other planes, wings, fuselages, identifiers scraped off. One of them bore a faded mark. 707. He stepped closer. It wasn't the wreckage he'd seen in Panama. It was another piece, meaning the plane had broken in mid-air or passed through the fold in multiple fragments. Meaning others had found it and brought it here. Meaning someone had been collecting. Before he could ask, Rachel turned to him. Her eyes were serious now. "You wanted answers. Just know, they come with a price. Once you go deeper, you don't get to walk away." Behind them, the sky began to darken, not with clouds, but with something heavier, stranger. The wind shifted, and for the first time since the crash, Johan felt the silence return, not around him, but inside him. Something was coming. The hangar wasn't on any map. Rachel explained it had once been used during the Cold War by a secret research group contracted by multiple governments. But when the funding dried up, or was forcibly shut down, it was buried, both figuratively and literally. What remained now was a graveyard of steel and silence, decaying under the salt-stained breeze of the Atlantic. Johan couldn't stop staring at the wings, lined up like tombstones. Some bore partial serial numbers, others had been scrubbed down to raw aluminum. But the one that caught his eye was unmistakable, 707 in faded red, just like on his plane. "Where did you get that?" he asked Rachel, stepping toward it like someone approaching a ghost. "I didn't," she replied. It was already here when I found this place, 6 years ago. Johan ran his fingers along the riveted edges. The metal was dented, not from impact but from pressure, crushed inward like it had been pulled. Not torn by force or weather, compressed, warped. The curvature didn't follow aerodynamic logic. It followed something else entirely. As he traced the lines, he remembered the pressure in the cabin just before the silence, the strange popping in his ears, the way the air seemed to ripple without movement. He looked back at Rachel. "This is from the same plane. I saw the tail in Panama." Rachel nodded. "They didn't go down in one piece. Whatever field they passed through, it splits things, shatters structure, disorients time. Some wreckage ends up thousands of kilometers away. Some doesn't end up at all." "Then where does it go?" Johan asked. "That's what we've been trying to figure out." She led him deeper into the hangar, where a metal door opened into a cold, narrow corridor lined with discarded equipment. Radios, radar screens, shredded manuals in multiple languages. At the end of the hallway, she stopped and keyed in a code on an ancient panel. The door hissed open. Inside, a single room buzzed with low power. A monitor glowed in the corner, displaying a live satellite feed. Or rather, what should have been a live satellite feed. The screen pulsed, flickered, showed glitches of light bending unnaturally. Every few seconds, the image distorted, as though the satellite itself was being stretched, pulled across frames. "That's the fold," Rachel said. Johan stared. "It's real. It moves," she said. "We track anomalies, brief gravitational shifts, electromagnetic pulses, temperature drops. The Bermuda Triangle isn't a triangle at all. It's a mobile corridor, a phase anomaly, and it's expanding." She clicked to another screen. It displayed flight paths from the last 6 months. Dozens of planes rerouted, some diverted mid-air without explanation. One had vanished for 7 minutes before reappearing 200 kilometers east, with all the instruments dead and the crew disoriented. Johan leaned in closer, heart racing. "These are commercial flights," he said. Rachel gave him a grim look. "Some of them, others not so public." "What does that mean?" "It means there are people who know exactly what the fold is, and they're not trying to stop it. They're trying to harness it." The word landed in Johan's chest like a stone. Harness it. That explained the silence, the disappearances, the missing flight records. Flight 707 wasn't just lost, it had been tested. Or worse, offered. He flipped through the journal again, his hands shaking. The entry from April 1963 now made more sense. The radio transmissions, the strange numbers. The writer hadn't gone mad, he'd been trying to warn someone. The fold didn't just distort time and space. It echoed, it listened. Rachel handed Johan a sealed box. Inside was an old cockpit voice recorder, badly damaged but intact. "Found this in the jungle last year, buried under a collapsed tree. It's from a Convair 880. He stared at it in disbelief. "You never played it?" "I tried," she said. "But it was encrypted. Not standard black box encryption. Something else. Something military. I didn't have the key." Johan opened his bag and pulled out the journal. The last page had strange symbols, seemingly nonsense when he first read them. But now, they looked familiar. He matched a series of the symbols to the box's control panel and punched in a code. The recorder clicked. A red light blinked once, then again, then a voice, crackling through layers of static. "Light is bending, altitude unreadable, passengers unconscious, something outside the window, oh God, coordinates." The tape cut. Johan's hands trembled. He looked at Rachel. She was pale. "That voice," she whispered. "That's not the pilot. That's a passenger, that's—" She didn't finish. She didn't need to. Johan knew it was him, his own voice, recorded in the final seconds before the crash. The memory flooded back, not just the silence, but the moment before it. He had stood up, reached for the cockpit door, and something had called him, a hum in the back of his mind, a warning or an invitation. The fold had marked him, and it wasn't finished. Rachel backed away slowly. "You need to leave," she said. "Now." Johan didn't move. "No. I need to go back." "Back where?" "To the place it started." He looked again at the coordinates. The fold had opened once, and Johan Lindström was going to find it again. The wind was heavier when Johan stepped out of the hangar, dense, weighted with something unspoken. The sun hadn't set, yet the sky already looked darker, as if a film had been pulled over it. Rachel stood at the entrance, her face rigid. The hum of the Cessna's cooling engine behind them made the silence feel mechanical, artificial. Something had changed since he heard the tape. It was as though listening to his own voice from that impossible moment had unlocked something in him or awakened something around him. He didn't remember speaking during the descent. His memory of the crash was a fractured blur of motion and panic, filled with pressure and fading light, and yet the voice on the recording was unmistakable. It was him. He had spoken in those final seconds. He had described what he saw, something outside the window, something bending the sky. "I have to go back," he repeated, more to himself than to Rachel. "There's something I didn't see, something I was meant to." Rachel didn't argue. She was staring at the clouds now, narrowing her eyes as they shifted unnaturally. "If the fold is waking up again, then time won't behave the way you expect it to. You think you'll find what you lost, but it might not be the same when you do." Johan looked at her. "I'm not trying to bring anything back. I just need to know why I came back at all." She hesitated, then led him back inside the hangar and handed him a thin folder. "You weren't the first to survive. There have been others, not many. But the ones who did, they never lived normal lives again. They were hunted, silenced, discredited, and then they vanished." Johan opened the folder. Inside were black and white photographs, grainy and overexposed but clear enough to show faces. A woman in a flight uniform, a man holding a flare gun, a group huddled around a half-buried fuselage, all different crashes, all different years, and beneath each, the same word: unresolved. "These people?" he asked. "You think they saw it too?" Rachel nodded. "They went through the fold. You're connected to it now, whether you want to be or not." Johan returned to the hotel that night with the folder and the journal, his mind thrumming with thoughts that refused to organize. The pieces were there, the fragmented wreckage, the survivor logs, the voice recorder, but they didn't make a clear picture. They hinted, pointed, suggested, but they didn't explain. And explanations were what he needed if he was going to survive with his mind intact. He didn't sleep. Instead, he opened the final page of the journal again, the one with the symbols. It wasn't just a code. It was a map, layered coordinates, flight paths, mathematical curves. At the center, marked in a red X, were numbers that didn't fit standard latitude and longitude. They were complex, like time stamps. Johan realized then that the fold didn't exist in one place. It existed in one moment. And if he wanted to return to it, he didn't just have to fly to a location. He had to fly to a time. He contacted Rachel at dawn. She met him at the hangar, already dressed for flight, as though she'd been waiting for his call. "I'll take you as close as I can," she said. "But after that, it's your choice." They loaded the Cessna with extra fuel, emergency supplies, and a satellite transponder modified to bounce its signal across multiple frequencies. "If we lose contact," Rachel explained, "this will leave a breadcrumb trail. Unless..." She didn't finish. She didn't have to. The takeoff was smooth. The sea stretched out beneath them like a mirror. Johan watched the water, searching for anything, shadows, disturbances, a ripple of movement that didn't match the wind. Rachel flew lower than usual, eyes locked on the altimeter, constantly adjusting for pressure changes. After an hour in the air, the instruments began to twitch. The compass spun once, reset, spun again. The radio hissed with static, then silence. Johan felt a pressure in his ears, familiar, nauseating. He recognized the soundlessness before it even arrived. That deep, bone-shaking absence of air and time. Rachel's voice cut through the headset. "We're crossing into it now." The sky turned pale. Not gray, not stormy, just pale. The kind of colorless light that made shadows disappear. Johan looked out the window and saw the ocean ripple like fabric caught in wind. But there was no wind. The engines groaned, struggling, instruments died. One by one, lights faded, and then stillness. The plane stopped moving, not falling, not flying, just stopped. Outside, the sea stretched infinitely, yet there was no horizon. The sky bent in directions it shouldn't. Johan's breath caught in his throat. Rachel looked at him. "This is as far as I go." The door of the Cessna opened on its own. Johan turned to see a thin mist swirling into the cabin, glowing faintly like static made visible. It wrapped around his hands, cool but not cold, inviting, familiar. He stepped out, not onto water, not into air, into something else. It felt like standing in memory. Every sound he'd ever heard, every face he'd ever forgotten, it all came rushing back, not as thoughts, as presence. And in that space, Johan saw them. Passengers from Flight 707, not alive, not dead, suspended. Some looked up. Some spoke words that didn't reach his ears. One of them, an old woman, held out her hand. He took it, and everything went white. The whiteness wasn't light. It was texture, thick and infinite, like mist you could feel but not breathe. Johan stood in it without casting a shadow, without hearing his own footsteps. The woman's hand in his was warm, too warm, almost pulsing. She didn't speak. None of them did. The passengers of Flight 707 surrounded him now, each one suspended in time like memories half recalled. Some still wore their seatbelts, others had luggage slung over their shoulders. All were exactly as he had seen them before the crash, frozen in the moment between the fall and the impossible. And yet, they moved, not with their bodies, but with their presence. He could feel their stories pressing into him, their names, their fears, the conversations they had just before impact. A child's laughter echoed in his mind, followed by a mother's lullaby in a language he didn't know. A man in a grey suit looked at him and mouthed a name. Anton. Johan didn't know who that was, but he felt the weight of the name lodged deep in his chest. He turned to speak, to ask them where he was, what this place was, but his mouth didn't work. Or maybe it did, and sound simply wasn't permitted here. In this place, speech wasn't needed. Emotions flowed like gravity, heavier than words, sharper than sound. They weren't just passengers, they were fragments, echoes of selves that couldn't move forward, caught in the fold like flies in amber. And Johan realized he was standing not in a space, but in a moment. A single, fractured heartbeat stretched so wide it had become a landscape. The fold was time collapsed, and he was inside it. One of the passengers, a young man with an airline pin on his lapel, stepped closer. He held a device in his hand, half melted, resembling a flight control dial. He extended it toward Johan. At first, Johan didn't understand. Then he touched it, and suddenly, the moment broke. The whiteness gave way, collapsing into sound and color and pain. Johan fell, not physically but mentally, as memories not his own poured into him. The young man was speaking now, not with a voice, but with thought. "We didn't crash. We transitioned. The fold doesn't kill, it divides." Images exploded behind Johan's eyes. The cockpit of Flight 707, the captain screaming over dead instruments, a sudden light outside the windows, pulsing, rhythmic, intelligent. And then, the split. The hull separating not from impact, but from dimensional stress. Parts of the plane scattered across realities, some passengers dragged into other timelines, others suspended. Only Johan had slipped through, fully formed, ejected like a splinter. The voice continued, "You weren't meant to return, but you resisted the fold. You anchored yourself. That's why you remember, that's why you're the key." Johan staggered backward, his mind spiraling. "Key to what?" he whispered, unsure if the sound would register. The light around him pulsed. A deep thrumming began, like the beat of a massive heart. The others stepped back. The woman who had first reached for him now pointed toward a tear in the whiteness, a rippling edge like a doorway made of heat waves. "It's not just about your flight," the voice said. "Others have passed through. You saw the wreckage. You know the truth. But the fold is changing. It's growing unstable. Someone is forcing it open, testing it." Johan saw flashes now. Military equipment in warehouses. Scientists standing before screens pulsing with impossible patterns. A man in a lab coat staring into a device shaped like an eye, repeating the phrase, "Subject confirmed. The fold is listening." The passengers were fading. One by one, their edges softened, like chalk drawings in the rain. The child vanished first, then the mother, then the man in the suit. Johan reached out, panicked. "Wait, what am I supposed to do?" The last thought hit him like thunder. You must choose. Stay here and be part of the silence, or go back and bring the truth. The tear widened, and Johan stepped through. The sound hit him first, a piercing roar of engines and rushing wind. Then came light, blinding, hot. He was falling again, but this time upright, conscious, alive. He landed hard on a metal floor. Pain seared through his knees. He gasped. He was in a plane, but not Flight 707. This aircraft was modern, military. The walls were grey, the seats lined with harnesses, the air thick with the scent of ozone and oil. Across from him sat a woman in uniform, mouth agape. "Where the hell did you come from?" she asked. Johan looked around. The insignias on the walls were unmarked. The flight crew stood frozen in shock. One of them reached for a weapon. Johan raised his hands. "I came from the fold," he said. They didn't understand. But they would. He had crossed through again, not backward, not forward, but sideways. A lateral shift into a parallel thread, a reality where he had never been born. A version of Earth where Flight 707 might still be missing, and the fold was still hungry. As the aircraft banked, Johan looked out the window. The sky rippled, and he knew he had to find a way back, because the silence was spreading, and he was the only one left who remembered how to break it. They restrained him within minutes. The soldiers, clean-cut, unspeaking, outfitted with black mat gear, moved with precision. They didn't scream or bark orders. They simply acted, as though they'd been trained for this very contingency. A man appearing mid-flight dropped into reality from nothing. Johan didn't resist. His body still ached from the re-entry, and his mind buzzed with static as though his thoughts were trying to realign themselves with gravity. He kept expecting the whiteness to return, the surreal silence of the fold to reassert itself and wash everything away again. But the thrum of engines beneath his feet remained constant. This was real, at least as real as any dimension he could now imagine. They blindfolded him before landing. No explanations, no rights, no questions. Just the cold hush of fear wrapped in military protocol. He was loaded into a vehicle. He could feel the hum of its electric engine beneath the metal floor and driven for what felt like hours. Time blurred. The fold had already broken his sense of linear progression, and now the blindfold stripped away even the illusion of control. When it was removed, he found himself in a steel chamber lit by narrow vertical lights along the walls. A single chair faced a blank monitor. There were no guards in sight, but he could feel them, behind glass, behind cameras, somewhere just beyond his reach. He sat in the chair. He had no choice. The monitor flickered to life. A face appeared. A woman, mid-40s, her hair pulled back into a tight knot, eyes sharp as scalpels. She wore no insignia. "Name?" she asked. "Johan Lindström," he answered. There was a pause. She tapped something off screen. "You don't exist," she said plainly. Johan swallowed. "Not here." The silence that followed was longer than expected. "I'm from the original stream," he continued, "from the timeline where Flight 707 vanished over the Bermuda Triangle in 1962. I survived, I returned, and then I crossed through the fold again. She blinked once. The fold, you know that term? I lived inside it. That changed something. She leaned slightly forward, fingers steepled. The monitor dimmed for a moment, then returned, now showing data, waveforms, anomaly patterns, satellite images. Some of the images were familiar, the same ones Rachel had shown him, the same spiral of disappearances. But these had new labels. They referred to temporal containment zones, phase break patterns, and a phrase that froze his blood. Confirmed incursion points, human origin re-entries. You've seen this before, Johan said. She nodded. We've monitored the fold for 28 years, but your appearance is unprecedented. How many have crossed back? None. Johan stared at the screen. That's not true. She paused, then spoke slowly, carefully. None who made it past interrogation. He stood, pacing now. The fold isn't just a natural anomaly. Someone's experimenting with it. You know it. You've seen it. They're trying to force it open. The woman didn't answer immediately. She stood as well, approaching the glass between them. We believe the fold is sentient, she said, not alive in the way you or I are, but reactive, responsive, like a membrane of reality that defends itself when threatened. Every intrusion risks expansion, breach, collapse. Johan shook his head. Then why are you still trying? Her eyes didn't waver. Because humanity has always reached for doors, even when they're locked, even when they say, do not enter. He felt the weight of it now. Every wreck, every lost crew, every whisper in the static. The fold hadn't been an accident. It had been a boundary, a warning. And now people like this woman were ignoring it, pushing, probing, trying to map it. And with each incursion, the fabric of time grew thinner. I crossed through time, he said, his voice softer now. And I brought something with me. She looked intrigued. What? Johan reached into the pocket of his tattered jeans, pulling out the small metal dial the passenger in the fold had given him. It was smooth, cold, etched with symbols that shimmered faintly in the artificial light. He placed it on the glass ledge beneath the monitor. It's a key, he said. I don't know what it unlocks, but I think it's a message, or a beacon. The woman's eyes widened, just for a second. Then the screen went black. Moments later, the door opened. They didn't restrain him this time. Instead, they walked him through a long tunnel that opened into what looked like a command center. Rows of monitors, operators in headsets, data streaming across glowing surfaces. At the center was a large model, a 3D projection of Earth wrapped in ribbons of light. At one point on the globe, a red pulse blinked steadily. That's where you're from, the woman said behind him. But the fold has begun to stretch. The pulses are appearing in new locations. South Atlantic, Arctic, even under continental plates. Johan turned to her. What happens if it breaks completely? We don't know, she replied. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything collapses into white. He remembered the whiteness. The faces frozen in silence. The choice he was given. You can't stop it, he said, but you can stop pushing. She didn't reply. Instead, she looked at the dial he had handed over. It's not just a key, she whispered. It's a seed. And then the alarms began. All across the room, monitors flashed red. Operators scrambled. Voices crackled over loudspeakers in panic. The projection of Earth began to fracture, lines shattering, spreading. Johan looked at the red blinking pulse. It wasn't blinking anymore. It was solid and multiplying. The sirens were not ordinary alarms. They were deeper, lower, and resonated in the bones more than in the ears. Johan staggered backward, the sharp red pulses from the screen strobing across his vision like a countdown. Operators ran, voices clipped with protocol and dread. Someone shouted, "Phase breach confirmed," and someone else responded with coordinates that meant nothing to Johan. But the way they looked at each other, pale and stricken, said more than numbers ever could. The woman in the tight bun, who still hadn't given him a name, snatched the device from the ledge where Johan had left it and examined it under a portable scanner. The symbols on the surface of the object flickered as if agitated, changing shape, rearranging themselves like magnetic filings on an invisible current. "It's reacting," she whispered. "This wasn't just an artifact, it's an interface." The room trembled, not from an explosion, but from something more subtle and terrifying. The floor did not shake, reality did. Johan felt it in his teeth first, then in his chest. Like the moment just before waking from a deep dream, the air felt too thick, too flexible. A clipboard slid off a table without anyone touching it. Pens rolled toward the same direction. The lights dimmed, not from lack of power, but from being swallowed. Outside, the windows, small, reinforced, looked out onto a courtyard filled with heavy fog that hadn't been there 5 minutes ago. In that fog were silhouettes, not people. Not quite. Shapes that seemed human from one angle, but fell apart at the edges. Johan stared and couldn't tell if they were moving or simply existing in multiple places at once. "This is it," the woman said, turning to the command room. "Lock down all incursion points, evacuate the lower levels, Project Enclave is over. We switch to Protocol Ilara." Johan grabbed her wrist. "What's Protocol Ilara?" She hesitated, and for the first time, fear cracked her voice. "Evacuation of this timeline." The words hit like a blade. "You're abandoning this reality?" he asked, incredulous. "We've prepared fallback corridors," she said. "Smaller, more stable timelines, fractures that can hold human consciousness long enough to seed repopulation." Johan could barely process what she was saying. "You mean copies, not people, echoes?" She looked away. "It's the only option now." The fold wasn't supposed to wake up this fast. Another tremor swept through the room. This one was louder, something like a groan, like the earth itself protesting. The lights flickered. Half the screens went black. Johan looked again at the interface device. It now hovered slightly above her palm, rotating slowly. A glow pulsed from its core like a heartbeat. His mind raced. It wasn't just a key or a seed. It was alive, or at least responsive, conscious in the way a magnetic field is, reactive and adaptive. He reached for it, and when his fingers touched the metal, time fractured. Not the world around him, his memory. Images poured into his mind all at once. Rachel standing in the hangar, whispering goodbye. The passengers in the fold, their silent faces. The cockpit of Flight 707, the screaming captain, and then a new image. A control panel, deep underground, hidden in a mountain, its lights blinking red. A code, 3 symbols, matching those that now spun across the device. "It's a beacon," he said, "but also a remote, a detonator." The woman paled. "A fail-safe. They left it with me," he said. "The ones who stayed behind in the fold. They knew this day would come. This device, it's meant to close it." She looked stunned. "Close it? Permanently?" Johan nodded. "That's what the message meant. You must choose. If the fold is sentient, it doesn't just open and expand. It waits, and if it senses intrusion, it defends." Outside, the fog had begun to press against the glass, thickening. A voice on the intercom screamed something unintelligible before cutting off in static. One of the soldiers near the door convulsed and collapsed, his body folding in on itself in a way that defied anatomy. "There's no time," Johan said. "Take me to the panel." She didn't question him. She led him down a service corridor, through layers of blast doors that hissed open with bioscans and voice prints. The final room was circular, lined with servers humming like hives. At the center stood a pedestal with a slot shaped precisely like the device Johan held. He stepped forward. The room whispered, not aloud. In his head, every memory he'd ever buried came rushing back. His father's funeral, his first kiss, the smell of his childhood home, the laughter of his sister. The scream of the wind when Flight 707 went dark, the white, the silence, the choice. The fold was offering him one last one. Insert the device and the fold would seal. Reality would harden again, but not without cost. The passengers in the fold would remain there, frozen, eternal. They would never return, not even him. "Do it," the woman said. "Now!" Johan closed his eyes. He saw the child's face, the old woman, the man in the suit. He whispered, "I'm sorry," and he inserted the device. The room exploded in white. There was no sound, no light, no feeling. At first, Johan floated in a vacuum of experience, a place where perception itself struggled to survive. He couldn't feel his limbs, couldn't locate his thoughts. He wasn't unconscious, nor was he awake. He simply was, disembodied, detached from the world he had just tried to save. If the fold had once been a misty, liminal space, this new place was pure void. A silence so complete that it wasn't absence, it was a presence in itself. Then something began to move inside the void, a ripple, a single line of color. It shimmered red, then gold, then indigo, sliding through the nothing like a seam in a fabric too vast to comprehend. Johan reached for it, not physically, but with whatever was left of him, and the ripple exploded into a cascade of vision. He was falling again, not through space, but through memories. But they weren't just his. He saw Rachel again, but she was younger, standing over a map, arguing with a man in a US military jacket. He saw the woman from the facility, as a child, staring up at a sky cracked by lightning that moved sideways. He saw the interior of the original Flight 707 cockpit, the captain praying under his breath while the co-pilot bled from the ears. He saw men in a desert, opening a gate made not of stone, but of sound. He saw the inside of the fold, its white corridors stretching across time, pulsing like the veins of a living thing. And then he saw himself. Not one version, dozens, hundreds. Each, Johan stood in a different moment, in a different place, but all were doing the same thing, choosing. Some inserted the device, others refused, some were dragged into the white, a few fought back. But all were Johan, all echoes, all split by the fold's infinite branching timelines. He wasn't a survivor, he was a variable, and the fold had been watching him through every possible outcome. The truth hit him in that strange, crushing way only metaphysical revelations can. The fold hadn't marked him, it had made him, not created him from scratch, but shaped him, replicated him across timelines like test subjects. It wasn't trying to break reality, it was trying to understand it, and it was using him to do so. That was the purpose of the interface. Not just to seal the fold, but to signal which version of Johan had understood the message. Only the right version, the one who reached empathy, sacrifice, and comprehension, could activate the final sequence. He hadn't just closed the fold, he had passed the test. A door opened in the darkness, not a literal one, a sensation, like pressure giving way to a warm current. Johan moved toward it, and light greeted him. Not the stark white of the fold, but the golden hue of a setting sun. He blinked, and for the first time in what felt like years, he saw sky, real sky, blue, scattered with clouds, brushed with orange. He was standing in a field, not a military base, not a timeline fractured by science, a field of tall grass, rustling gently in the wind. The air smelled of cedar and earth. Nearby, a stream murmured over smooth stones. There were birds and silence. But not the fold's silence, a peaceful one, a natural one. He touched his chest and found his body intact. He breathed. It felt heavy and real and sacred. A figure approached across the field. He recognized the silhouette instantly, the old woman from the fold. Her smile was warm and sad. "You chose," she said. "I had to." "No," she replied gently. "Many of you didn't." Johan swallowed. "Where am I?" She looked around. "You'd call this a sanctuary." a result of the final integration. I don't understand. She turned to face him fully. When you sealed the fold, you didn't destroy it. You aligned it, harmonized the splinters of time across realities. That's what the device was, a resonance key. The fold isn't evil. It was fragmented, sick, but you stabilized it. That's why you're here. He sat down in the grass, overwhelmed. I thought I was ending everything. You ended the break. You restored the balance. Then, what happens now? She sat beside him. You rest. For a while. Johan closed his eyes and let the breeze wash over him. He felt peace unlike anything he'd known since before the crash, and yet part of him remained tethered to the life before. The chaos, the unanswered questions. What about the others? He asked. They're here too, she said. Not all in the same place, but in balance. Those who were lost now exist, not trapped, not erased, remembered. A distant bell rang, not loud but musical, harmonious. Your world, she said, will feel this change, not consciously, but something will shift. People will forget what never made sense. The Bermuda Triangle will be just another myth. The disappearances will stop. Johan nodded. And me? She smiled. You were the story's end, but also its beginning. He looked at his hands. They looked the same. But he wasn't the same. I was afraid, he said. We all are. In the face of the unknown. The grass swayed. The stream glimmered. The sun inched lower on the horizon. I remember everything, he whispered. You were meant to, and in the distance, he saw them, the passengers, walking across the field, laughing, talking, no longer fragmented, no longer shadows. They were whole. And Johan, for the first time in what felt like forever, stood up without fear. Johan walked through the golden field, the tall grass whispering against his legs like threads of memory. Every step carried a sensation of familiarity, but not his own, as if he were walking in the footprints of countless selves who had reached this place by other means, in other timelines. He didn't feel lost. He didn't feel displaced. He felt complete. The passengers of Flight 707 emerged slowly from the horizon, not as ghosts or echoes, but as people, fully formed, breathing, alive. They smiled when they saw him. Some nodded. A few clapped lightly as if recognizing something sacred. Johan's breath caught in his throat. There were children here, families reunited, elderly couples holding hands, men and women who had once screamed into the void of the fold now strolled like souls who'd found paradise. And yet, he knew this wasn't paradise, not in the religious sense. It was something else entirely. This place wasn't a reward. It was an equilibrium, a neutral space that had never belonged to one time, one world, or one version of history. The fold, once a fractured, dangerous anomaly, had become a cradle for reconciliation, its splinters fused by the choice of one man across countless versions of himself. A young girl approached Johan. She was maybe 9, with freckles and soft brown eyes. She held something in her hand, a paper airplane carefully folded. She didn't speak, just offered it to him. He took it gently, unfolded it. Inside was a message written in crayon. Thank you for bringing us home. He fell to his knees. Tears came not in sobs, but in steady streams. There was no shame in them, no fear, only release. He hadn't realized how heavy the guilt had been until this moment. The guilt of surviving, the guilt of remembering what others couldn't, the guilt of walking away when so many had stayed behind. Now the burden lifted, not erased but honored. He looked up. The woman who had guided him before, the same presence from the fold, stood nearby. She watched him, serene, eyes full of knowing. Why me? He asked softly. Because you never stopped asking. Will I stay here? You can. And if I don't? Her gaze drifted to the sky, where a new ripple began to form. Not a tear, but a window. Through it he saw Earth again. Cities, mountains, people waking up to a world slightly more whole, slightly less fractured. Their lives untouched by the fold, but subtly improved. A reality realigned. Somewhere in that world, Johan's name was unknown. He never boarded Flight 707 in that timeline. He never vanished. His family never mourned him, but they also never heard the truth. "I could go back?" he asked. She nodded. "As someone else, or as yourself, it would take adjustment," he thought for a long time. The idea of peace here was tempting. Eternal rest in a place untouched by pain. But Johan hadn't come all this way to rest. He came to understand, to bring back what others were never allowed to see. And now he had that chance. "I want to go," he said. "Back." She smiled. "You always do." She reached out and placed a hand on his forehead. The sensation was immediate, a flood of warmth, clarity, and sadness. The faces of the passengers imprinted themselves one last time in his mind. Their gratitude, their resilience, their forgiveness. He wouldn't forget, not this time. The sky opened wider, and Johan Lindström walked into the light. He awoke in a hospital bed. The white ceiling above him was modern, fluorescent lights humming gently. A heart monitor beeped rhythmically beside him. His body was sore, his hands bandaged, but he was alive and human. No one around him recognized him. A nurse smiled politely, assuming he was a patient who'd been found under unknown circumstances. He asked for a mirror. When she brought one, he stared into the reflection. It was still his face, older, more tired, but undeniably his. He smiled. Later, he was discharged into a world that no longer remembered Flight 707. There were no records, no memorial plaques, no photos in archives. It had never happened in this version of Earth. He was a man without a past. But he carried the truth inside him. Johan wrote, he didn't sensationalize, he didn't call it science fiction. He wrote what he remembered. Every ripple, every fracture, every moment inside the fold. The passengers, the decision, the peace, the seed of balance. People read his story. Some dismissed it, others believed. But one day he received a letter in the mail. It had no return address. Inside was a folded piece of paper, shaped like an airplane. He opened it. Inside, in a child's handwriting, it said, "Thank you for bringing us home." And Johan Lindström, survivor of a flight the world forgot, finally allowed himself to rest.